Action.
All right, good afternoon, everyone. We are here at the April meeting of the Research Committee of the Maryland Lynching Truth and Reconciliation Commission. Thank you for joining us. I have taken roll on who seems to be participating here, which I believe we're pretty much looking at commissioners or associated staff for the most part here. But if anybody else can feel free to announce themselves in the chat or unmute yourself to contribute to the conversation or ask any questions. But my intention for the meeting today was to primarily focus on the research associated with Frederick County, as we have the upcoming hearing in less than 2 weeks. So we want to make sure that, especially for commissioners, but also for members of the public, we're aware of the reports and research that has already been done that will inform some of what is shared out at the hearing. So for that purpose, I will reiterate and drop in the chat information about the public hearing on Saturday, April 13th. And I see we have some additional commissioners joining, at least to listen in. So welcome, welcome, welcome. I see two Donna Tyler Hollies. Can I confirm that one of them is Brett, or is it just you here with us today, Donna?
Brett is temp fan.
Okay, that's what I
thought.
Hello,
David, we're both here. Donna is having trouble unmuting again, but she's on. She can hear, but she can't get unmuted.
Gotcha. Well, thank you for joining, and I'll definitely want to point to you at times here if there are, especially if there are items from the case study profiles that you prepared that are worth emphasizing for us, or that we may want to look into further. But again, looking forward to the April 13th hearing. We will be addressing within that the murders of 3 individuals in Frederick County. That would be James Carroll, 1879, John Biggis, 1887, and James Bowen, 1895. As most folks here probably know, there has been, or there was written, a substantial report by former National Park Service historian Dean Herron, and that's a paper, I believe an unpublished paper, entitled "The Mob Fairly Howled, Lynching in Frederick County, Maryland, 1879 to 1895, which primarily looks at those 3 cases. So a good deal of what we would be sharing would be building off of or relaying that information. It's also worth noting that Mr. Herron has agreed to participate in the public hearing as one of our speakers to provide historical context about these 3 events. So we very much want to thank him for his efforts and his collaboration throughout this process. We also, in addition to that really robust resource, we are leaning on the research of Donna and Brett and Heritage Associates. So there were 3 profiles that were prepared, which I would like to just kind of share screen and move through those during the meeting here today, so we can again kind of catch all of ourselves up on the basic details of these cases, as well as some of the biographical and genealogical information that's been uncovered or illuminated. So yeah, Brett and Donna, or probably just Brett if you're the one that can unmute yourself. As I'm moving through these profiles, I'm hoping you can chime in, and especially if there are notable details or like I said, things that might be in need of some more discussion or investigation, we can look at that.
Okay.
So I'm going to start with James Carroll. Is that what folks are seeing right now? The victim profile for James Carroll? Can I get a thumbs up one way or the other?
It's coming up, David. Yes, now it's there.
Okay. Thank you. And anybody who was on the invite for this meeting should also have these Word documents attached to an update that I sent within the past day.
Okay. All right. Yeah.
I mean, it probably makes
Yeah,
sense.
Chris.
So James,
Yeah, David, I just wanted to double check, and I'm not sure if
parents
this
were
has
deceased.
been decided yet. At the
Father was James.
Prince George's County, it wasn't the hearing, but it's a session they had, that someone had written, or one could say rewritten, or could digested this into perhaps a paragraph 2 or 3 or 4, which whoever the speaker was, whoever was chosen to be the speaker would read. Are we doing that with this one? Is that yet to be done? Is it for the speaker to determine what of the biographies will be read? I wasn't sure how that's being handled, and if it needs to be handled from this point up to the 13th, of course.
Yeah, I don't think I have an answer for that necessarily, and it's kind of a unique case in that, since Dean Heron agreed to be at least part of that speaking role, he kind of has a lot of the information in his head, and I also was not in attendance for the meeting last week that may have kind of nailed down some more of the logistics, but I think in general that would be good practice for this committee to, distill these things down a little bit more for the hearings, but also in thinking about how, the website presence for the narratives, for example, might evolve.
Okay, Amy, do you remember if that was decided, or were we leaving it up for Dean to do that? I don't remember myself, so I'm slightly embarrassed to say that, but I don't remember that coming out. I just remember that's what we did in Prince George's County.
My recollection is that Dean was going to identify what he was going to say about each of the 3 victims.
Okay.
He was, I think 2 meetings ago, concerned about the amount of time he was going to be speaking because of the 3. And then I voiced concern that he might actually shortchange their stories too much.
Right.
He was too concerned about time. And so
Sure.
I think he was still in that 10 to 15 minute window per individual. Nick, I think you were there as well.
Yeah, he was talking about going about 10, 15 minutes, per
Each one, right.
That would be about a half hour to 45 minutes. And then I think, if I'm not mistaken, we're going to do another 15 minutes for Terry Ann Scott to talk about broader implications.
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, definitely good to know. And again, we definitely want to recognize that none of these pieces of research are kind of the final product that is
Right.
a commission product, so to speak. These are compilations of research or other people's research that will be credited to them, but that will inform, what we end up putting out there through our body.
Yeah. I mean, I'm sorry, David, to interrupt. I think to that point in the synopses that Brett and Donna have created, like what you have up here, identified are some really good researchers' notes about areas that should have additional research completed. And I would think that needs to be named somehow in the hearing.
Right.
If there's living relatives, I think I, as a member of the public, trying to switch hats, would say, well, why aren't the descendants been invited to testify? So just naming that it's still in process, and even naming some of the specifics might be good.
Yeah, totally agree. And I think that might be part of my role. And I'll have to take a look at the run of show again. I apologize. I'm still catching up on some of that from last week. But the opportunity for the research committee share out, that's typically been something that I have referred to are things that are still in process, things that need more investigation, and areas where public engagement would support those ongoing goals. So yeah, absolutely. That should be noted.
Okay, but if you go in,
So just kind of moving through, and we want to get used to saying these individuals' names, and becoming more familiar with the circumstances that they came out of, and the circumstances that led to these situations. So James Carroll, being somebody who was born before the end of the Civil War, coming of age during the Reconstruction period, I do think it's notable, and we've seen this in several of the cases that have been addressed in hearings, but also just that are a part of our charge as a commission, where the individual was not born necessarily in the jurisdiction where they were murdered or alleged to have committed crimes. So James Carroll falls into that category, having been born in Washington County, which is an adjacent community to Frederick County. But again, as we see as well, that often it was economic opportunity that would drive somebody to work in another community, or within multiple communities, and not necessarily have a permanent home. But we know that while he was born in Washington County, and spent some of his life there, as well as in Allegheny County, it is obviously Frederick County that we are most focused on within this context. And so what has been outlined, you can see information about the victim, as well as the community that they are coming from, to the extent that specific personal history is available. We know that that's something that perhaps descendant communities can contribute to as well. So that's a hope, is that we learn more about the individuals from either community members or people that may have been descended from them. But something noted here that we don't know any church affiliation, for example, that could be expanded upon depending on what type of collaboration we get from the community. And so we know that as well, looking at the actual lynching cases and whatever crimes or alleged crimes precipitated them. In the case of James Carroll, we see an instance of the accusation of an outrage or a sexual violence crime against the wife of Richard Thomas. So that was the accusation, alleged crime that led to this incident in an area that at that time was called Licksville, but now Tuscarora. I think that's notable as well, that, in addition to the kind of inexact science of saying where people are coming from or living at a given time, that you also have these name changes in communities that could impact our ability to research. So wanting to point that out. And it does seem like in this case, as opposed to the two other Frederick County cases, there is less source evidence within the newspapers, for example. But that could be another area for to look for expanded research.
I think you're absolutely right. We've had a tough time with James Carroll, and I think local collaboration might help fill in a fuller picture.
Good to know. Do you want to, Brett, would you mind speaking on the key individuals and witnesses section that is included in each of these profiles?
You're going to test my memory here, but
well, just kind of generally what the purpose of that section was, and also maybe how the committee and local collaboration can build on it.
Well, I think it helps to identify who the key players were, but it also is a lead-in to our genealogical research. For example, we have found some descendants of the sheriff, Volkman, and of the alleged victim, Emily Trundle, I believe was her middle name, Emily Trundle Thomas. So it's a good thing. It's an aid to further research. Let me just summarize it by saying, from our perspective, knowing who the key players were helps you understand the context. You often see, and I'm not sure if it's the case in this case, but you often see the relationships where the sheriffs are the same in more than one case. The victims are sometimes related to the sheriff, so it helps bring context to it, and it helps provide us an entree to the genealogical research.
Absolutely, and to that point, I know that the mayor of Frederick in the later case, I believe that is the biggest case, was actually related to the alleged victim. Am I remembering that correctly?
Yes,
So there is a genealogical connection between, white community members that were central in these kind of community reactions as well.
Exactly.
And I am noting within Dean Herron's report that there are other newspapers and primary sources. So I can make a point of kind of consolidating some of that so we have it all in one place, and also if there are, and I don't know, Brett, if there were maybe particular primary sources that were more helpful than others as far as the newspaper accounts, but that could be something to update our committee and broader commission about, because I'm not necessarily expecting everybody to read everything going into it. So if I can pull some highlights.
We can certainly take a second look and give you an update on that.
Right. And some of the other witnesses or key individuals that are represented would also be those that were involved with whatever legal proceedings occurred after the murders. So in thinking about restorative justice and some of the recommendations, the different entities that were involved, whether it be state's attorneys, mayors, etc., law enforcement, those individuals are often listed in that section too. And I should point out, Brett mentioned the genealogical work in identifying descendants of perpetrators or other often white community members that were involved. We have, as a committee and as a commission, spent, I would say, less energy in outreach to perpetrator descendants than we have to victim descendants. That's not to the exclusion. We know that perpetrator descendants have participated in some of the other hearings, but we are privileging the victim descendants as a matter of policy with the commission. So just want to note that for the record, that we will continue to pursue all angles, but especially for thinking about the public hearings, it is, there is a privileging and a hierarchy of hopeful participation. Any questions or anything to add about James Carroll at this time? And I believe that's the individual that we as a committee and commission had not identified any descendants for. Whereas the other two, and that's not to say that they don't exist, we know that community members as well are connected to some of these individuals. But I'm going to move on to.
I have a quick question.
Yeah, please.
Do we know if his family had been enslaved by the Carrolls, as in the white plantation owner Carrolls? It's such an obvious question.
Yeah.
And again, I think that's just an added piece, an added layer. We know that James Carroll was born enslaved, at least from what I've read. It doesn't say who was the enslaver, who, what it says. I think there was a geographic location, but even going back a generation, I don't want to. It's a lot more research to do between now and the 13th.
Yeah, I don't have that answer, but I agree, especially with a notable last name, that it's at least a possible question that could come up. And given that there were populations in that part of the state that were associated with that family, I don't think it's unreasonable that there might have been a connection, especially since the Carrolls enslaved hundreds, if not thousands of people over time.
That-
But I don't know, Brett, if that came up in the
Yes,
in the
it
research.
did. In fact, Donna just called me on the phone to say exactly what you and Amy said, that obviously the question is going to come up, but it's hard to trace because they own so many slaves. The Carroll family did. But they did, the Carrolls, the white Carrolls did have a presence in Washington County. But we just haven't been able to make a connection. But I think Amy's correct. The question is going to be asked.
So perhaps that's something that should just be stated, that it is some, that it is a question that we have asked ourselves, and therefore exactly what Dean just said, name it into the record.
Yeah, I'm noting that for myself.
Yeah, I had a question about this piece as well. This is Commissioner Chavy. So, just to be clear, you all have looked at the plantation owners in the area in which Carol was born and raised, and you have a list of those plantation owners, the potential owners, or no?
I don't know if we have a list of them. I do know that we did look at to determine if the Carroll family had a presence in Washington County, and they did. But I do not believe we have a list of the plantation owners.
Who are tied to the Carroll? Okay, the plantations that the Carrolls owned in Washington County. Do we at least know that information?
At the moment, no, but I'm sure I can find it out in short order.
Because I think it would be beneficial. I've had some success with this in North Carolina and other cases, but you're able to identify based on the birth dates. If you have a specific individual in mind whose birthday is obviously prior to emancipation, you'll in the state records and the wills, you're able to see transfers of property, in this case, enslaved individuals whose the ages oftentimes may align, and you can speculate in some ways that these could potentially be Carroll, specifically if you know that there's a Carroll plantation in the area, but then also if you have access to those estate records, wills, and also the slave schedule as well. So if we have the slave census for Carroll, for Washington County, and you have the property of the Carrolls in that county, it would be beneficial to at least make note of individuals enslaved at said plantations whose birthdays are lined up with James Carroll. Just to make note of it.
Good point. We'll follow up. We'll follow up on that.
Okay.
Thank you all for that. And I'm trying to note these questions and suggestions for general purposes as well. I know we're less than 2 weeks out on this one, so we can kind of set some of those expectations and strategies moving forward as well. So what I have pulled up now is the profile for John Biggis. Right off the bat, this, as with several other cases that we've seen, and just genealogical and historical research in general, being cognizant of various name spellings and pronunciations is very important. Noticing that I know I've seen alternate spellings for the last name Biggis, kind of from conversation to conversation, it's referred to different ways. But I believe that Biggus is the most common version that we've seen, and that kind of seems to bear out with primary sources. But just as a general note, we would try to go with what is most commonly seen, or certainly if there are family members or community members that would specify that, that's something that should be honored as well. So Biggis, as opposed to Carroll, was born after the Civil War in 1867, so he would not have been born enslaved, although perhaps his parents or other family members were. Like Carroll and some of the other individuals we are looking at, he lived in different counties, or he may have lived in, or excuse me. Yeah, it does look like he lived in different jurisdictions, including Carroll County, which is another neighbor to Frederick County. He was associated with a particular church, at least at some time, where his parents were buried at Woodville Methodist Church Cemetery. And I know that in some of our cases, pursuing those connections through the churches, I don't know if we've had a lot of success in that respect, but it's certainly a path that we should continue trying to follow, to learn more about the individuals and their families, and especially if there are any records associated with them. The alleged crime that led to Biggis's murder was for an alleged assault on a white woman in the community named Mary Yakel. And I don't know if anybody has a correct pronunciation on that name, but that's something that we'd want to confirm if possible. Again, the list of individuals who were associated with the case, one way or the other. I know this one had and I'm just gonna highlight this. Brett, would you or Donna be able to speak on Ida Barnes and that connection with Biggis?
If I remember correctly, she was a laundress, I believe, and living in Frederick, and he ran to her. I believe he ran to her residence at some point, and they were allegedly lovers. And that's all that I can recall at the moment, David.
Okay.
There may be more about her that I'm just not recalling, but I know there was an apparent relationship between the two.
Yeah, and I'll try to confirm too where that is discussed in any more detail in the primary source materials.
Right.
But that's what I understand as well, that something about there was that relationship, and something about that either led to him being further implicated, or to some extent was used as evidence against him.
I'll check our notes and send you a note.
I was going to say, wasn't he the one, who had the letter to,
Right.
who was, ostensibly his
There was a love letter. He had a love letter.
Which the papers published, but which again, to my mind, speaks to, if he's got her waiting for him, why would he mess with, Mary Yakel? But that's a whole other set of questions to deal with. But yeah, I mean, I just find that letter absolutely compelling.
Yeah, I'm gonna make a note to specifically identify the primary source, if it was reprinted in the newspaper or whether it was alluded to, because that certainly provides information about the individual, but also about the case to some extent, it seems.
Yeah.
And something else that should be emphasized as well with this case is that there was greater, I believe, greater public attention on this case, and there was also greater possibility of larger community disruption. There was fear among the white community that there was going to be some sort of attack and vengeance after the lynching took place. And that's something I will, we'll want to be describing as well, as far as the kind of community context. And I think it's, it's different than whatever 10 years earlier, when James Carroll went through his ordeal. But we also have noted those public and political reactions, very, very notable. And this also aligns with even the Baltimore County case and the lynching of Howard Cooper, where I believe also the Mutual Brotherhood of Liberty, Harvey Johnson, and other leaders within Baltimore's Black community, but the larger Black community in Maryland, kind of were more mobilizing in a political fashion to protest these events, to give them to give them more space for their views within the newspapers and other publications. So I think we do, between these two cases, there is kind of a notable shift in the public reaction and the way that other, the community tried to mobilize either against it happening in the first place or in reaction to after the lynching had already occurred.
I also think it's really important, and you named it, the Brothers of Liberty, the Harvey Johnson's group, that popped up for me too, as again, as we're looking at the arc in terms of, sort of outcome statements, is this movement across the state, that these are not happening in isolation or in silence anymore, that there's word is traveling, there is a response from African-American community. There's a lot of questions, I think, that we start seeing. I'm against for white and Black. I don't like the lynching, but something still had to happen. People are in this conundrum. Different groups are in this conundrum, and we can see, I think we can start to see some uncomfortableness, for lack of a better word. That's an awful word to use right now. But so the ties from one to another, from one county to another. Also, I forgot that there was a Mr. Ryder that I think was mentioned in connection to James Carroll's lynching. I need to go back and reread it. And again, there's the Ryders in Baltimore County. So, again, you mentioned, people keep showing up. It's the same families. It might be a generation earlier or later, or the cousin of, or the whomever. I also think that's really important to be noting. It's such a tangled web and organized in its unorganization amongst the perpetrators.
Absolutely. Thank you for that, Amy. And, I agree that as a general point, that's something that our committee and the commission at large should be trying to track those trends of individuals, family names, and that sort of crossover between communities. Because, like you said, these things were not happening in isolation. And obviously, as we get later in time, there are more media outlets. There is more opportunity to share and connect. And notably, you still do not have the Afro-American newspaper coming out of Baltimore, which most of us know, did what these predominantly white outlets would not do, which is really interrogate these cases much more closely, bring in family members of the victims and others of the Black community who, pretty much had no voice up until the 1890s, except for in some select cases. So that's certainly notable. And this kind of burgeoning civil rights movement, if you will, with groups like the Mutual Brotherhood of Liberty that preceded the NAACP, for example. And there is an actual gravestone. Brett, are we 100% sure this is the man that we are looking for? Or
Yes,
is there
we
any
are.
amount of speculation?
No, we just thought that the name was not the most popular spelling, but we're confident that this is the right man.
Okay. And I, don't know for sure, but I would say that feels unique to me, anecdotally, at least as far as, the 39 or so individuals that we are recognizing and researching as a commission.
Right.
And I recognize we're at 3:45, so I do want to try to get through these 3 profiles and tease out whatever else we can
David,
from them. Yeah.
Very quickly before you move on, we have just recently been in contact via Ancestry with a Rachel Williams, who claims to be a relative of Biggest. So we're following up on that, and hopefully we'll get back to you later this week. We want to try to nail that down and extend an invitation, if you approve, to her to come to the hearing.
Thank you for that. And I would say, similar to the other individual, Mr. Freeland, if there's any amount of family tree or whatever can kind of visualize the connection, even if it's not 100% clear, if that can be shared with the committee, that would be helpful. But yeah, I would say, just for me, definitely continue to pursue that communication. And as in past instances, if it kind of comes up against any resistance or lack of clarity,
Right.
please share that with our committee. We can then bring in other leadership to determine best steps. But yeah, we definitely want folks to be aware of the hearing, but understanding that with the time constraints, it might be challenging at this juncture, but definitely keep us in the loop on that.
Will do.
So the last of the 3 individuals that will be formally recognized in Frederick County is James Bowens. who was lynched in 1895. Again, noting different names, spellings, nicknames, etc. He was also born after the Civil War, but we also see some of the, via his father and potentially other family members, intersections with the Civil War and the participation of African American soldiers through the USCT, which I think is notable in thinking about, again, who were community members, what situations were they and their parents coming out of, and what did it mean to them. So we definitely want to acknowledge that service and that transition for family members. So it does look like James Bowens was a Frederick County native, and perhaps his parents as well, with ties to several organizations within the community, both religious, civic, military.
Excuse me.
Obviously, by this time, going in chronological order, there would have been obviously community awareness of the two prior lynchings that were discussed already. So having that context is important, and would have informed. We imagine that would have informed the reactions and the ways that this case was handled. So we have an alleged assault on Lily Long, a white domestic servant, just south of Frederick City, that caused the reaction. Various community individuals that were involved. Yes, so there it is, Brett, that we were referring to earlier. The mayor, at the time of Frederick City, was the son of John Biggis's alleged. So that would have been Mary Yeakel.
And I believe she was also the niece of the sheriff, if I remember correctly.
Mm. The alleged victim in this case was the niece of the sheriff.
Yeah.
So obviously, those intertwined relationships would have, impacted the way that some of these individuals reacted, and the various power dynamics. Having the power to push for these actions, or to not have defended Bowens or others that were being threatened with violence. Knowing those personal connections is important, and something I think we want to call out in the public presentation. You've also noted here that, thinking about the era that we're in, by 1895, you're really starting to see lynching being recognized as more of an epidemic across the country, moving out of the Reconstruction era. So we know this would have been the height of seeing that sort of terror violence in Maryland and other places. Yeah, Chris.
I'm just wondering, and I know this is not exactly research oriented, but it seems like the way that we have parsed things out. Did we communicate to Donna and Brett that we have someone else who is saying that they're a descendant of James Bowen, the Eric Asprey Bay? Because I feel like we used to have Donna and Brett are the ones who reach out to someone because they're usually you guys HA are the people who find these descendants. So I wasn't sure if, I just don't remember. I know I sent that email, but I don't remember if I sent it to you, Donna and Brett. And if so, have you reached out? And
Chris, Eric actually Bay contacted Donna.
okay.
And we were wondering how he got the email number sheet that he used. So I think you just answered that question.
Okay, gotcha. Okay, fine.
Yeah, she's been in touch. She talked to him late last week, and they're trying to reconnect this week.
Okay, great. All right, good. All right, thanks.
Yeah, thank you for that, Chris. That was one of the pieces of information I know I needed to revisit from the last week or two when I've been off and online. So that was essentially a cold call email to the commission, correct?
That's what it read like to me.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And I believe that's also been communicated to our local colleagues in Frederick County, but I don't know that there had been any further conversation about that.
We did bring it up in the last meeting, yes.
Okay.
I believe Willie was going to reach out to him.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, good to know. And so again, thinking about some of the reactions and some of the ways that the white community in Maryland, the white community at large, and the Black community kind of had evolving points of view on these things. I know, Amy, you had brought that up as related to the second lynching case in Frederick County. We see a little bit more evidence of that, where the newspaper accounts are not as uniformly in approval of these acts as maybe some previous ones were. Although I don't think that's a linear progression exactly. You do at least see an evolution of the way that it's being received. And perhaps again that's a function of there being more media outlets, as well as kind of the national tone around racial terror violence shifting and becoming maybe less localized. But for sure, as we acknowledge the primary source evidence and community reactions, if it is actually a trend, that's something we'll want to point out, or if it is more so, on a case-by-case basis. So I'm noting that for myself as well, to pursue, or if anybody else had feedback about that idea. All right. So we're getting toward the end of the hour here. And I want to respect folks' time on that. So we'll note again that these 3 profiles may continue to evolve a bit ahead of April 13th, as we interrogate some of the questions that were brought up today, or additional information that might come through with source research or descendant outreach. But so I'll continue to work with the committee and with Heritage Associates to tease that out and get us really where we need to be, as well as coordinate with our local collaborators in Frederick County. Yes, Hannah.
Hi, thank you, David. I was curious if it would be helpful for us to maybe set a deadline for sending any new information that could come up I also wanted to ask what would be the best format or method to share any information related to these 3 cases that could come up. Should they be sent to you or Donna and Brett?
Yeah, that's a good point. Because, I mean, this is just me speaking, but because we have an external collaborator and Mr. Dean Heron, who has agreed to kind of take on the bulk of that speaking responsibility, I don't see any and he, you know, he kind of has a sense of what would be shared out, although we'll collaborate with him as well. But I would say, you know, information can come pretty much as late as it needs to. And you know, we would of course receive information beyond the hearing as well. But, you know, in preparing materials for the hearing, yeah, we're not going to want to be incorporating those up to the day of, but the research process will go on. So I would say any information that needs to be sent probably doesn't have a hard deadline, although obviously we'd love to have it as soon as possible. And the core people would be, you know, those that are part of this committee formally through the commission. So certainly myself, Chris, Brett, Donna, Nick Creary as well, Amy. So yeah, I would just say basically the people that tend to show up on these calls. And if it's something you just send to like 5 of us, we can make sure that it's distributed further should it come through.
Thank you. One last question. I was curious if this hearing if it is an appropriate place for like attempted lynchings in Frederick to be mentioned. I had emailed a few news article PDFs to I think almost everyone who is on this call. I don't think Dr. Chavis received it because I had just replied to the initial invite for this meeting, but I had found an attempted lynching in Frederick of a young man, and I was curious if that's like useful or appropriate to be mentioned during the hearing.
And I apologize. I know you sent that email and I did
Oh,
not.
don't worry.
I did not actually dig into it.
Don't worry at all.
Why don't we circle back on that? I would
Yeah.
say generally speaking, the commission has tried to stick with the, you know, the dictionary definition of the racial terror lynching victims, but that's not to say that, you know, other relevant crimes in the community should not be mentioned. So we'll just put a pin in that and we can continue that conversation over email. But I think that's, and yeah, we can make sure you see that, Dr. Chavis. I'd say that's definitely relevant to our work. Just a matter of kind of how it gets factored into the public share out.
Absolutely. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, everyone, for your time. Again, just follow up with myself and other commissioners as we continue planning for April 13th. And if any other questions or suggestions come up, feel free to continue that through the email thread.
Thank you.
If you've not registered, please register.
Thank you all.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.